Hey there, I'm Christopher Schoenwald, and welcome to Life as a show intently focused on helping people find their professional pathway by exploring and unearthing the details of jobs from around the world. Hey, how are you doing? Before we get started today, I do have a favor to ask of all of you. I did start a channel over on YouTube in the last year and a half or so. And yeah, I'm really trying to promote that. And the reason being is I think the content that I'm putting out here, we're doing all right with some of these guests for coming on. And I think it deserves to be put in front of more people. And one of the best ways, of course, of doing that is through a platform like YouTube. Now, if you do interact with these videos on YouTube, that algorithm loves it. And that's the only way that it knows to continually share that content, put it in front of more people. So yeah, I could be a little bit biased here, but I think, finding out about some of these careers is great for young people. It's great for mid-career professionals. If you have a second, head on over to YouTube, life as a ... That's where you can find it. And yeah, like or subscribe. It would help a ton. Well, on to the show. All right, I want to launch into this episode with a question for you. I want you to imagine that you are a young person, you're into science, environmental matters, and also this idea of exploration. When I say exploration, I'm talking like climbing some of the biggest mountains in the world in the name of scientific research, and also maybe traipsing through a place like Antarctica, rifle in hand, just in case, you have one of those overly aggressive polar bears who wants to join your party. Well, I do have a treat for you. I have this guest today who has combined all three elements I just listed off there into this really, really fascinating career. And we talk about all of these things. One, beauty of exploration, the melding of curiosity and exploration together. And of course, some of her scientific polar expeditions. She shares some really, really insightful and engaging stories on all of that. We also get into some of her background and where she gained mentorship and where she kind of hopes to fill that gap for other young women who are trying to make their way into this environmental space. We also talk about things like storytelling, how to convey, some of the research and data that you're finding. So it does resonate with people and leads to action that we can all be proud of and hopeful for changing things, making a better future. So yeah, this conversation touches on so much more than that. Those are just a few things. But I would like to introduce her to you a little bit more formally and then jump into all of this. Dr. Ulyana Horodyskyj Peña is a scientist, part-time professor, mountaineer, and explorer. However, as you'll soon learn, these tags only reveal a fraction of who she is and what she does. Let me start here. She is head of communications for the North Central Climate Adaptation Science Center at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And further, she's a certified polar guide and works in the Arctic and Antarctica with Aurora Expeditions as a geology, glaciology, climate change expert. Now, with such a deep reservoir of scientific knowledge, she consults on various research projects. Two recent undertakings include assisting an all women team doing work near the Arctic, and the other with a young female climber on K2. Now, I might add that Dr. Horodyskyj Peña also manages to find time to teach introductory and upper level environmental science classes as a visiting assistant professor at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I'm sure you're getting a sense of this, but Dr. Horodyskyj Peña's innate curiosity and drive to learn more about the world around her propels her forward in a lot of different directions. Get this, by the time she turned 23, she'd already traveled to and worked on all 7 continents. And she's also climbed famed mountains like Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, as well as others in places like Argentina, Chile, and Nepal in a quest to collect scientific data. Her PhD investigated ice mass loss on rock-covered glaciers in the Himalayas, particularly in the Khumbu Valley, the Everest region in Nepal. A Fulbright fellowship afforded her the opportunity to live abroad in Nepal in 2013 and 14, where she traveled over 1,000 miles or about 1,600 kilometers on foot, collecting data on glacial changes in high alpine regions. And to close things out, Dr. Horodyskyj Peña has even been part of projects related to space research. Yeah, you heard that right, space research. In fact, she's helped with the testing of new commercial spacesuits to acting as a mission commander for an on-the-ground deep space high-fidelity analog mission to an asteroid. So, with all of that noted, all of that stated, here's my conversation with Dr. Horodyskyj Peña. Yeah, all right. So welcome to the program. How are you doing today, Elena?
Good. Nice to see you, Chris.
Yeah, really excited for this talk. And your background kind of speaks for itself as far as accomplishments and unique experiences go. Quite frankly, I don't think there's a lot of people on this planet who have done as much as you have or seen what you've seen. So I think for those reasons and plenty more, we're set for a fascinating conversation. But maybe we could launch right into it. I do have the first segment lined up, something called Coloring Wikipedia. And as my guests know, it's basically a segment where I just read off a definition of what the profession is, or sometimes the topic of what the guest, is related to. And I decided here for you to go with this broad concept, and I hope that was okay. I went with the topic of exploration. I think it applies to a lot of your, activities and what you're part of. So let me just read that off, and then after, maybe you could share your comments. Does this sound all right?
Sounds good.
All right, here we go. Exploration. Exploration is the process of exploring, an activity which has some expectation of discovery. Exploration has been defined as to travel somewhere in search of discovery, to examine or investigate something systematically, to examine diagnostically, to seek experience firsthand, and to wander without any particular aim or purpose. Very broad.
Mm-hmm.
Again, broad is probably the best word for it, but what would be your take?
Yeah, so coming at this as a scientist, it's definitely in line with scientific discovery. So I'm primarily work out in the field, out in the real world, not the laboratory setting. There's a lot of unknowns. That's the exciting part. There's a lot of things still to be found out. You think that oftentimes, we figured out all these things, but not really. One of the things during my research is I would sit on the edge of a glacier. It's called a moraine. So it's a pile of rocks that the glacier shoved apart. And I would just watch and listen to the landscape in the beginning. So, we have this world of gadgets, distractions. It's nice sometimes to be able to just sit in nature, have it reveal its secrets to us. So coming in as a scientist, you have a list of questions, hypotheses. You do, the systematic kind of process and the diagnostics that you talked about there with exploration. But sometimes nature reveals the question to you instead, something you may not have thought of. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of exploration and discovery in science. And also having this firsthand kind of experiential learning is a big part of it as well, especially when you're working on changing landscapes like glaciers.
Yeah. As I was listening to you explain that, I also sort of got this feeling that it could be interpreted sometimes at least, maybe as a bit of a spiritual experience. Like you're sitting there and you're connecting in a way with nature and the world around you, right?
Absolutely. I remember one experience when I'm crossing the glacier, I had camera sights on both sides to be tracking changes. And I was making my way to the other side and this intense dust storm just blew up, across the glacier, and I'm sheltering, and just waiting it out. And then the sun comes out and it's gorgeous. And I'm the only person standing here witnessing this. And it is one of those powerful things too, the power of nature, and that you as a scientist are really trying to understand, hey, what just happened here?
Right. Yeah. And your place within all of it. Certainly. In terms of, I guess, again, I've read this off the top, you have a wide array of experiences, as a scientist, but you've on the exploring side too, trekking up mountains in Kilimanjaro and all around the world, designing spacesuits and a wide array of things here. And as I was thinking about this, as I was researching, there's two ideas or two concepts that sort of like came to mind for you. And one was like exploration, which we've just sort of addressed. And the other is curiosity. And I'm guessing that those two concepts sort of like are intertwined, and they bring all of these seemingly disparate sort of experiences and interests together. Would that be an accurate assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was always that restless kid, in school. So I did science fair projects. I was always curious, getting into things. And my nickname has become Ulyana because I'm always like wanting to know things. It's like if somebody asks me something I don't know, there I go. So I'm eager to find out. But you have to investigate and vet things properly. In the internet world, there's a lot out there. So that's why they call it research, right? Search and research and you kind of hit it. Yeah, it's a lot of varied experiences, but that binding theme is science education. And the way I like to put it is my goal is really to bring science to the masses. That's what I do through my photography, through my writing, research, and to bring the masses to science through expeditionary, like kind of work and bringing them along on treks and climbs.
Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't we shift over into this other segment here, a day in the life? And the spirit of the segment, of course, is to kind of get a peek inside of what a day or maybe a week might represent to somebody like yourself. And I'm thinking here that it might be a little bit difficult because, again, you have so many different types of experiences here. But broadly speaking, maybe you could speak to one or two of them. I mean, just to kind of paint a picture for listeners.
Sure, yeah, and it varies depending if I'm at home or on expedition. So we can kind of look at both sides of that. So on expedition, it really depends on the weather, like what you're going to be able to do. Can I go out and check on a weather station or a camera station? Should we move a camp up a mountain? Or should we move down? Standing polar bear watch, sometimes just that. So yeah, there really is, it varies a lot. And that's what really attracts me too, because I was never a person that really liked kind of just one thing, as you can see from all my experiences as well. So having that variability is key to my success, I think, in keeping interest in the work. And at home, I work part-time at this climate center at a university. So it's really rewarding work because I'm communicating science to the public. So those days they're structured the way I want as well. I can put in the hours as I want, which is important for me as a mountaineer, because I do work out 6 days a week. So that's 3 days cardio, 3 days strength training, and it could be up in the mountains in a gym. And so having the flexibility to work and work out has been also very important. That work-life balance is very important.
Yeah, most definitely. It sounds like you have it figured out there. Yeah, a bit envious.
It took a while to get there.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Well, I think that gives a nice idea of the variety here. Like, in getting back to, say, I don't know, like when you are out within the wild, within nature, and you're working on a project, well, what would that be like? Say, if it is in the Arctic, for example, what would be,
Yeah, there's always a plan A, B, and C, right? The A is kind of the desire. B is, if you can't do some of those things, and plan C is for the bad weather days. So you kind of try to have a general sense of what options exist. So really kind of tracking weather forecasts and communicating with team members who might have information as well. But a lot of the things we do to prep also is cheat sheets. You just write down, these are the tasks to do, get them laminated, because when you're working at altitude, it's really easy to then forget, wait, what was the order of what I'm supposed to do? And It's all right there. Like, okay, take a GPS point. All right, take a sample. How's the sampling done? So that kind of organization.
The structuring of it all. Yeah.
Definitely important. A lot of that gets done beforehand for expeditions. And then you just hope for the best when you're out there and follow
it, as best you can. Okay, and I also like that point. I think it's really interesting, at least the plan A, the plan B, the plan C, to account for some of these conditions, to account for things that are out of your control. You have a task of things you could be doing in this situation versus this.
Exactly, because oftentimes, like, there's a lot of money being spent on expeditions, and so you don't want to lose a day. You just want to see, like, hey, what else can we do on this day if there's bad weather? And when I was in Nepal, that would entail, hey, sitting down with the locals. Here's what we've been looking at. Here's what we've been finding out. Have a look at the imagery with us. Involving them, kind of bringing them into the fold is really important. Working with locals wherever we work.
Well, I have this other segment here, something called Pathways. And as the name suggests, we're kind of like getting into the person's past and how they made their way into the present day profession. And as I often say, most times, or more times than not, it's interesting to me in that the guests line towards where they've ended up was never straight. There's always some zigging, zagging, left-hand turns, right-hand turns. And I'd suspect it might be similar for you, but I'd still love to hear all the same. And also beyond that too, I've got this idea here that, like we've already spoken to, this point of curiosity and wonder for the world around you is probably, always been part of who you are and your makeup. But maybe you could comment on that.
Sure thing. Yeah. I mean, true. Yes. I always had that strong sense of wonder. I mean, I read so much as a kid. I mean, I would always get those back in the day. Pizza Hut would give the little personal pan pizzas if you did this many books. And I was never motivated really by the pizza. It's a nice perk, but I read a lot. And that kind of really helped formulate my imagination about these things. And like, I wondered about the Arctic and Antarctica, what are these places like, these exotic locations? Can I ever go there? So I didn't think it was a possibility. Like, how do I blend all these things that I like? I have no role models for this. But as time kind of went on, so I got into science fairs I think I was 10 or 12, somewhere in that range, one of my first science fairs, onwards through my teens. And I won a bunch of scholarship money that afforded me an opportunity to go to college and kind of formulate, hey, what what interests do I have? And that's when I came across geology. I can be outside doing this kind of work. And then a friend introduced me to the climbing gym. So it all kind of started to come together. Like I found out about like all the people who have climbed Everest in the past and started reading all about, the high mountains as well. But where are the women, right? So like I'm a woman, I'm a scientist, I'm a mountaineer. Like I'm starting to develop all this. And I learned about Arlene Blum. She led the first all women's expedition to Himalayan peak. And it was a tough one. It was Annapurna. And it was a woman breaking barriers in both science, because she got a PhD in chemistry, and mountaineering,
Oh, wow.
And so I read these stories, I read her books. I have, she sold t-shirts with her team in order to raise money for their expedition.
Mm-hmm.
And I own one of those shirts, and I
Nice.
Met her actually last year, and she was
wow.
amazing. And I told her, it was such an honor, and to tell her like, you're an inspiration to me, and I hope to do the same, with my career path.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, it's interesting to me. It never gets dull or boring to hear these sort of stories from guests as they share it, and like, again, it sometimes, to me, it comes across as like, one, there's this drive inside, for you're talking about like just this wonder and wanting to learn more and understand the world around you a little bit more. And then also too, it's like these interactions with people along the way too, being introduced to this, a climbing gym, being introduced to this subject in university. And it's how all of these things somehow come together amounts to where people end up, and it's really interesting. And I think it's always interesting as well. Like I oftentimes have guests who will say post-recording, for example, that it was fun to kind of look back on their careers and kind of like connect those dots up.
Right.
We don't often take that time to do those things, but in doing so, sometimes you can learn a little bit more about yourself, I suppose. And not only that, I mean, for listeners too, I think it's helpful in that they don't have to have it all figured out right now. You know what I mean? Like things are going to pop up that they're not going to expect, that if you have your eyes open and you are consciously considering things, it could open you up to new worlds and new possibilities.
Yeah, and also just seeing like the glimmers within rejections and failures might be like a pathway to something different. Like where I ended up going to college was not like I was hoping for another school, and I'm like, but this school ended up amazing, and it really set me on a path. It couldn't have been a better experience for me. I wanted to be an astronaut, and I made it, to the interview phase in the last class, I guess in 2017, and I didn't get there, but I have an amazing life with all the adventures on the earth, and ways to kind of keep paying things forward for the next generation. So you always have to look for like you said, the convoluted paths, and at the end of the day, are you happy? Doing what you love? Are you following a passion?
One last question within the segment, and it's maybe not directly related, but you'd raise a point of, you meeting somebody that you looked up to at one point, and, how big of an impact that person had on your life as far as inspiration goes. And now what you're doing, creating these opportunities perhaps for others, and maybe young women as well that might be looking up to you. Has that sort of full circle experience come around?
It actually is starting to it's in the process. I've been kind of looking back, like you said, kind of like looking back on career, but also like the students that I've been helping, that I've been mentoring, who are winning science fairs now, who are going to colleges and pursuing geology, for example. One young lady who is the youngest American woman to climb Everest is now climbing K2 and collaborating with me on science, who reached out. Like, this is amazing. And it's a chance to also, to really like hopefully mentor someone. And I had mentors. I had really good mentors, but none of them were female. And so I kind of always missing part of that perspective. And so Arlene provided some of that through, her writings in the books, but that's where I hope to fill in kind of a gap. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the things I did read off in the bio, is that you are consulting and helping with people who are like one person who's, summiting Everest or attempting to, and then doing research on, was it on K2?
K2, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, like your impact and what you're able to do for the world. I mean, one thing like you personally doing it must be rewarding, but then on the other hand, it's now your tentacles are sort of out there, you by proxy of someone else, you are still creating impact. You are still, delivering value and whatnot. That must be a rewarding experience. Yeah.
The thing I wanted, like with the degree, was not just a PhD to have it. It's like to have it be a platform for other things. applied science, humanitarian science, science for good, and science for the masses where people can really understand, like, especially climate change. That's one of the big things we work on, is helping people come to an understanding of like our natural world. I mean, I love it so much. I have so much passion for it. And I always try to, show that in whatever capacity, whether I'm teaching a college class or speaking to young kids. But like in some ways, we're kind of losing it a bit, as urbanization takes over. So it's important not to lose that.
Speaking of climate change and whatnot, I mean, certainly the challenges we face there are real,
Right.
more important than ever in terms of us finding ways forward. But I'm also thinking here, too, that in terms of the opportunities, because of all these challenges we face, that opportunities to get into this space from a career perspective, professional perspective, within science, perhaps, must be amplified to a degree. And I'm thinking of, like opportunities to secure funding, get approvals, even just carve out careers. What would you say to this assessment?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great time right now. I mean, there's so much more awareness to what's going on and what we need to do and the urgency. I think people are much more aware ever than before. There's more unique ways to also get funding. So the kind of standard is government funding, National Science Foundation, National Institute of Health, all these national institutes. But there's also the private sector for raising money. And I actually did fundraising for my PhD. Did this back in 2011 to 14. There's like Kickstarter for Science type fundraising platforms. Neither one's in existence anymore, but I was petridish.org and rockethub.com, I believe. And I was able to fund Himalayan expeditions for my PhD to go to the glacial lakes I was studying to study impacts of pollution in the high mountains.
Wow.
And it was risky because it's like, am I going to raise any money? What's the expectation here?
Are we going to get enough here?
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, you don't have to be a scientist to contribute to climate, right? We need artists, communicating science through art, music, business and marketing, right? Anything to get the messaging across to stimulate action. So that's the thing. You don't need to be a scientist to help. No, that's just one pathway.
Yeah. It's a really good point. I've been fortunate to speak with a number of different people on this podcast. Actually, I had somebody from your region, I suppose, within the States, within Colorado, who leads one of the nation's largest sustainability programs, University of Colorado. And some really interesting discussions. And also, too, I mean, people within the film and entertainment industry, sustainability consultants working on major motion films and television shows. Like, you're right. I mean, there's so many different ways to be getting involved with this movement and creating impact. So, yeah, I really like that point. Well, I have this other question here, too, that relates to climate change once again. The challenges we face are real and they're there. And if anything, I feel as though we're having, new reports, damning reports that are coming out almost on a near constant basis.
Right.
And I sometimes worry to an extent that like just the volume of it all numbs a certain part of the population,
Right.
But on the other hand, people like yourself that are getting out there, seeing it, witnessing it, but then also recounting it to others, in the form of a story or in some other way that's not like just a data or research report.
Right.
I think that sort of like brings people back, it sort of lets them experience what the impacts are a little bit more viscerally, perhaps. And as someone who has experienced a lot of these things, and a lot of distressing things, I'm assuming, what would you say to this? I mean, what could you share?
Yeah, I mean, storytelling, I think, is absolutely essential. It's something that I realized quite early in my career, that images are much more powerful than graphs. You can show all the graphs and numbers in the world, but most people are not going to really care about that, right? They're not going to form any kind of emotional attachment to it. So science is objective by its nature, right? But the way we communicate it doesn't have to be. We can make human connections, right, in order for that messaging to connect. So like I mentioned, I had set up these cameras on the glacier and then capture some pretty big events, the equivalent of the volume of thousands of Olympic-sized swimming pools emptying out before refilling. And the BBC picked it up, actually. I think it was my first or second year of grad school, and I'm on a press conference, and the BBC is interviewing me, and it was
no way. It's surreal.
Yeah, the images spoke. They conveyed it. People can see it for themselves. And not only that, I work with the locals, the Sherpas that live in the villages nearby to these threats of floods coming down from these lakes. And I started the Sherpa Scientist Initiative when I lived abroad towards empowering the local people, right? It's about a blending of our knowledge, right? It's not just the scientist savior coming in. It's about, well, what about the people at the source who are living through this, who are witnessing changes and can bear witness to this? Listen to their stories as well. Listen from the source.
Yeah, yeah. A critical element to it all. No,
Yeah.
100%, 100%. Outside of what you just shared there, I mean, the glacial, sort of movements and whatnot, and witnessing something like that. What would be some other things that you've seen that have stuck with you, I suppose, that have also maybe like created moments for people, or that it touched them in a certain way?
I think, yeah, a lot of it kind of does cater around my year abroad when I lived in Nepal, and I kind of shared on a daily basis through blogs and photos about day-to-day kind of life there. Because people are really curious about that. Like, what is that like living in that different country? So completely different. What are the people like? What's the food like? So you can connect through those kinds of stories too. And I don't like it's sneaking in the science. I don't like that word, but it kind of you can use these opportunities to really educate
Yeah,
as
yeah.
well.
I think so too. I mean, it fits, right? I mean, you're checking off a few boxes there. Again, the people have interest in this anyway, and then when you're sliding into science into it as well, like that probably feeds or satisfies like a different need or want for people that are tuning in or reading for what
Right.
what you're posting.
I've heard people saying like they would never experience these places like Baffin Island in the Canadian Arctic, working with the Inuits. I mean, that was very exciting for me because we flew in a Cessna 210 from Boulder, Colorado, all the way up there. So already our
Oh
journey is
wow,
capturing attention, because we're trying to have a low carbon footprint. And then we're interacting with the locals there. We're on this ice cap, one of the last remnants of the last ice age. And it's really captivating stories that people can be like, wow, I had no idea about some of these things. Or like, hey, we couldn't get to our field site because the ice all melted. Even when you are disappointed in you can't get a result for like a research grant or something because it's something out of your control, you can turn it around to saying, well, look, here's an example of these changes happening. So
yeah. Tons of different like empowering moments along the way, and by proxy of your experiences, people can kind of get in on that, so that when they do see this report that is coming out, they can sort of like connect the dots.
yeah.
And suddenly those numbers on those pages or those graphs make that much more sense to them. They hit them in a
Yeah.
different way. So yeah, I really
Yeah,
like
and I
that.
think there's definitely a power of analogy too. Like, and it depends on the audience. So when I talk about like some of these Himalayan glaciers, they don't retreat in the common ways we think about glaciers retreating. They deflate vertically. They behave a little differently. So how much has changed in like 100 years? So in the US, that's like, hey, the height of the Statue of Liberty or the height of Big Ben in the UK. So I always try to cater lectures also to like the audience and giving them something that they can relate to, be like, wow, I've been there, I've seen that. That's a lot of ice that's gone.
There you go. That's a really good point. Well, I have this other question here too that kind of continues on, dovetails what we're just speaking about, really. And it's like this notion of what you're seeing and what you're experiencing. I'm guessing here you must be just constantly faced with these like paradoxical shots of reality. On the one hand, you have like the pure and utter beauty of what this world holds, what it's all about. And you're seeing it, you're witnessing it, you're experiencing it. But then on the other hand, you're also seeing firsthand the destruction. You're seeing it fall apart, especially in some regions, probably more so than others. So, as somebody who cares, you already mentioned this, who cares so deeply and is passionate about the world we live in and nature and everything else, I'm guessing here that, like, emotionally and cognitively speaking, you must be on a bit of a roller coaster ride at times. Like, how do you compartmentalize this? When you're
Right.
caring so deeply for something, how do you manage these emotions?
Yeah, I mean, so I am a scientist. I have the analytical mind, so I can sort of detach, when I'm looking at data and whatnot. But I'm also very much an artist with like I love photography. That's my medium that I communicate through. But I always try to take kind of that hopeful slant. Kathmandu has a lot of air pollution problems and water pollution. That's the city I lived in, and I was having a lot of issues with my lungs. But that's a solvable case. The soot that comes into the air and the air pollution, like you can clear that out in a few weeks if you just regulate some of this stuff. So always trying to be like, here's the problem, but what's the solution? If you keep throwing problems at people, you're right, they get numb. They're not going to do anything about it. But if they see there's a glimmer of like, oh, I didn't know that, but I can do something about it on an individual level, plus community, just local communities, pockets of people doing this, that's how you mobilize a movement. And education is the doorway. And it doesn't have to be formal, right? It can be informal, just impromptu, talking to people on the trail. I'll do that. But it's true that social inertia is still a big problem, right? It's kind of just human nature. I mean, I don't know if you saw the movie Don't Look Up,
Oh, yeah.
but they're
Yeah.
kind of like, they didn't tell us. It's like, scientists are all like,
In that
we've been
movie,
saying this.
it was good on so many different levels, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The thing is, there are tipping points. We are going to reach these, at which point things are irreversible. And so we do have to emphasize the urgency of this without scaring, but so kind of taking that whole full slant, being forward thinking and saying, hey, these parts are still solvable. I mean, how do you do a PhD? Like, it's not all at once, right? It's years of efforts and then little micro steps and back steps. And, it's the same thing when trying to solve a crisis like this. It's going to be a collective effort and everyone doing little things towards that big solution.
So it sounds to me like a philosophical approach to it all. And that,
Definitely.
you definitely have this sort of firm vision of, what needs to be done, at least like theoretically speaking, what you're just saying there, and educating the masses in the right way. And I guess not being bogged down by the negativity of it, finding potential solutions. And that's sort of maybe the way that you're personally as well, not only like helping others, but personally getting through some of those moments. Yeah.
And also like changing behavior is really hard. Everyone's so used to having plastic bags here. And then all of a sudden, what? We can't, I'll just pay for it. That's still not solving the problem. It's like, no, we have to change our ways. And the thing is, the beauty of it is once the change gets initiated, people will resist it a lot in the beginning, but then they just go with it. So hopefully that'll happen with a lot of these solutions it also has to be good for the consumer as well. Like consumers shouldn't always be blamed for all these problems, right? We are not the problems, like me traveling or you traveling. It's like, no, there's corporations, that have to be taken into account and that have to be considered, that they need to be making these big steps, and we can pressure them to do that.
That's a good point. I mean, I like that last point there. We can pressure them, because I think that's something that I've, at least personally, like I've been I have been witnessing over the last, I'd say even like 5, 7, 8 years, like that has changed. And especially with the rise of things like social media, you can attack that all you want for a number of good reasons. But on the one hand, in the scope of this conversation, at times, like you have youth, especially it's youth that are going after some of these big corporations and calling them out, and when you get like an issue it's a hot button issue that a bunch of people get behind, that is when action happens. And these corporations do take a step back and they do sort of examine their policies, not maybe for the betterment of society necessarily, but it's just like, well, we don't want this PR hit. Maybe we need to do something. But either way, change is coming about.
Change is coming. Like, yeah.
That is, that is encouraging. Like that.
Yeah. I mean, to your point, also like money talks, right? And so when they realize, hey, consumers aren't buying our things, we have to change. I mean, you can use that as a motivator though, right? You use whatever we can. I mean, just in the store the other day, I noticed less plastic packaging of some of the stuff I used to buy. Cause I'm like, I don't really want to buy this, but it's like, but I eat this. But then I like to see these changes, and I'm going to support companies that do that. Toilet paper is always wrapped in plastic, which makes no sense. I mean, it's wrapped in paper elsewhere around the world. And I recently saw one company that's doing it, and I'm like, all right, I'm buying that one, and convincing people this is how it works. This is how you stimulate that action.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And talking about it, getting it out there. Yeah, 100%. Right. All right. Well, I do have one last question within the segment, and you've kind of already spoken to this, broadly speaking, I guess, but maybe you can just address it one more time for us. And, philosophically speaking, the work that you're doing, the meaning behind it all to you, maybe you could sort of like summarize that. Again, you've spoken about this, I think, at different points in answering these other questions, but, bringing it all together, what does this work mean to you personally?
I mean, it really means everything to me. Everything in my life is about trying to be of service to others, through my science, through writing, through photography, getting this message across. Climate change is an existential threat, maybe not to us, right, to our generation, but for the ones coming down the line. So we really need to be thinking about, we have to stop kicking the can down the road. It's like when I was born, this was already known about, and here we are in 2023. It's something has to change. And I think, again, the younger generations, and like you said, social media has its benefits, it has its problems, of course, but it also has its benefits that can be put to use for how it should be, for communicating and problem solving. At least that's how I see it. That's how I've used it.
Yeah. Raising awareness, getting support for certain issues, 100%. It can definitely be used for good.
Yeah, because if you didn't have it, yeah, if you didn't have it, imagine what that would look like. It's like, how do I reach people? How do I do this? Do people look at my webpage? Like, how does this? But you're seeing that feedback constantly. You're seeing people sharing it. You're like, yes, this is what we want. Share the content, share it, because we also want the good information. I mean, I love that Facebook now vets a lot of stuff saying, hey, learn more about climate change here or this or that, and it says it's fact checking a lot more, which should have been happening a long time ago, but at least it is.
Moving in the right direction to a
Yeah.
certain degree. Yeah. Okay. Well, we are shifting over into this middle segment now, water cooler story segment. And it's one of the most fun segments on this program for listeners, for me as well, selfishly speaking. And I'd love to hear what you have for us today.
Yeah, so I was thinking about a story. There's many from the field, but the one that really, I guess, kind of set me on the path to working in extreme locations. So when I was a freshman in university, my first year, I found out that the department where I was doing all my classes, the earth sciences, they go to Antarctica for research. It's like, oh, I really want to go to Antarctica. I want to help with the science. I want to do anything so I applied for it for 4 years. And my senior year, like right before graduation, I got chosen to go. So I worked on the back deck of an icebreaker. So it's a working ship. Scientists had different kinds of projects that they were doing, and I served like 12-hour working shifts of whatever was needed. So there's a lot of discoveries to be had. Like, hey, I am the one seeing the seafloor for the first time through our surveys. I'm looking at this core. Look at that shell. How old is that? And what's that? That's a volcanic eruption. So there's a lot of this is as a 21-year-old, so there's a lot of this kind of excitement. And then there's videos on YouTube that show this, but a huge calving event. Calving is giving birth to an iceberg. So this glacier is coming down and calved off. It must have been like 30 meters, a 30-meter wall that just came down and bobbed back up. And, we're all excited, like, oh my gosh, it's amazing. But then looking back, we're like, we could have died. It's like the whole ship just went like this. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So it's not just the ice coming, right? It's the wave.
It's the wave, right?
And the other wave. And huge pieces of ice washed up on the back deck, dented steel containers that were on the back deck. And it's just, wow, that was the power of Mother Nature right there. I want to do this the rest of my life. I want to understand this. I want to travel to these places. And that really evoked this sense of awe, at the power, sadness, because wow, look what just happened. So yet you do, like you were talking about before, you do get these kind of mixed emotions a lot. You're like, yeah, I found this. Oh no, I found this.
Yeah.
Kind
of goes back to that point of, these experiences along the way, some big ones like that you can definitely look back and be like, okay, this really set me up. This inspired me in some way. This is where I want to go in my career. And, these kind of signposts or guides, guideposts along the way, that set you off in all these different directions. Yeah. And that one, how can it not?
I'm
just picturing you.
That was it. And then what was it? I think not a year later, I was up north. And I had a grant to do some work in Iceland, and then I had some extra money to go to Greenland and have this experience, by myself carrying a rifle in the wilds of Greenland, and just having an adventure, and again, it was one of those things that it's science for me, but I also just the secrets of our planet, are all over the place, and trying to discover those. I mean, it's kind of the Indiana Jones, appeal to not only 100%. Do science, but adventure. The adventure part really drives me. Oh.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's an area, at least for me personally, I've never been really able to scratch that itch as deeply as what you have, but in researching for this talk, I won't lie, that was definitely one of the things I was most excited about, is that, because I think a lot of us, we all have sort of these little dreams as children, perhaps, and even as we go older, some of us hold on to them longer than others, and some go all the way and live them out, what you're doing. And utmost respect for somebody like yourself, but also a little bit of envy. I'm not going to lie. It's just,
Come on a trip.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I should look into that. One last question I do have here, within this water cooler story segment, and I did, mention this off the top, is your relationship or your experiences with space and space exploration. And I'm wondering if we could just slide that in there. Maybe you could share a little bit about that, spacesuits, helping design that. I mean, that one really kind of stood out as well.
Yeah, I have been interested in space from as a young kid, I want to be an astronaut. And I did, like I said, I had applied. But here in Boulder, there's something called the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. And it allows you to get kind of a certification, and learn everything about the upper atmosphere, where climate change is also manifesting at the edge of space, and something called the mesosphere. And so it's a chance for like suborbital flight, in the future. And it's being a citizen scientist astronaut, which really always appealed to me. Like, again, the science component there, the adventure component. So yes, I have flown in the Vomit Comet.
Okay. All right.
You go
all
up,
right.
you pull 2Gs up, then you go weightless for 30 seconds, and then you come down.
Yes,
and you do that over and over.
I just a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago or so, I did have a former NASA astronaut on, commander of the
Nice.
International Space Station, and when I'm researching for that talk, I did learn about this Vomit Comet. So yes, maybe that's one aspect of the adventure I could maybe live without. But anyway, yeah, it must have been quite the experience.
That was quite the experience. And like, so the Institute is also partnered with this private company that's gotten NASA contracts for spacesuit development for eventually citizens going into space. So that's what we are testing, unpressurized and pressurized. So that was a cool opportunity to, again, be taking part as a human guinea pig, if you will, in that aspect. And then there's NASA has something called HERA, Human Exploration Research Analog. And so I got chosen for that mission. It was 4 people enclosed in a space that's like 650 square feet, and lived there for a month, and they made me the commander. So
Wow.
there's probably a dozen or more science projects going on in that habitat that we were helping out with. They're studying how we reacted to sleep deprivation, how we reacted to stress, confinement. And this was all pre-COVID. So during the pandemic, when we were locked in, and it's like, well, all right, we've been here before.
This is nothing. Yeah,
and the food's much better. So yeah, this is nothing.
Wow. Yeah, that must have been quite the experience then. For 1 month.
Very different from what I'm used to. But I mean, I've been confined to a tent, day or something with bad weather in the mountains, but I could always go out. And so being actually confined, like this is a space station kind of mock-up, like you can't leave, was very different. So psychologically dealing with that. And how I did it was just focusing on the tasks. I'm in charge. These are all the tasks that need to be delegated out. We exercised every day for at least 30 minutes. So that helped things. And I was going to be climbing a mountain just a couple months after. So I needed to keep in shape. And so we had this ladder that connected 2 decks. And I just made it like a group challenge. All right, let's see if we can get to the height of this mountain and this one, going up and down. Exactly.
There you go. Just
Setting
structuring
group challenges.
Yeah. Structuring your day, structuring your tasks.
Mhm.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that little extra bit there. Well, I do have this last segment here, Elena. It's something called the crystal ball segment. As the name implies, we're looking to the future, usually trends, predictions, so on and so forth. And I'd like to return to this topic of technology. Again, I think there's a certain exuberance surrounding it, and the possibilities and what we can leverage it for, say within climate change. I think there's opportunities there. But on the other hand, though, too, I think there might be this over dependence on it that we can use technology to solve this problem. Or if this issue pops up, we got technology, we can take care of it. I think there is that danger there as well. But I would like to hear, maybe from your perspective, some of the things where you see technology being, a tool that we can use to help with this particular issue, or, on one hand, where technology is giving you pause and is concerning you.
Yeah, I mean, so a lot of climate science already entails modeling, right? Invoking the use of supercomputers. If they can predict the past, like what's already occurred, then that's a good indicator that they can forward predict what's going to change. So all these projections that come out, saying, hey, worst case scenario, or if we change this and this, is very useful information for policymakers, actually, because you can actually see the impacts on models that are quite good about what's coming. There's a lot of unknown too, right? The climate system is quite complicated and variable. There's natural plus the man-made components. And, we figured out quite a bit of it, but there's still a lot that maybe things are changing faster than expected. That certainly happened in the Arctic with the sea ice. So when it comes to AI, I mean, it has its place. It can definitely help. We can leverage it, but still stand by junk data in equals junk results out, right? So we still have to vet, what we're putting into the systems, sifting through everything. And that still requires that human touch. I don't think you can ever get rid of that kind of human component at this point, like where AI is now. I mean, it's probably going to change. I don't know. Should we have that capability for AI? That's a whole nother topic.
Whole other question, whole other podcast, really.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. But like it can be quite helpful, as a teacher, though, also like Chat GPT, while great, it's like, wait a second, did you guys actually write this or not? So, there's a worry that critical thinking skills might change as a result because students aren't looking and looking up and vetting sources either. They're just typing it in. I'm not saying it's happening, but I'm saying it could be, though. And we need to be really careful of that as well, because one of the things I really promote in my classes is development of those critical thinking skills. That's so important. And that's something that AI doesn't quite have yet, right? It has a lot of information, but it doesn't always know how to put it together.
I think that's a really good point. And I think that's, one of the discussion points that I often have within the segment. And when AI does come up, is the way I interpret it. AI itself is still as a tool, right? It is this tool. And you're right. I mean, that critical analysis of the content that it's bringing up to us, it still has to be there. Like, that's our role in utilizing this tool. And we can't forget that point. Like,
right.
Whatever data it's scraping and pulling together for us, now we have to go through it and sift through and like, okay, yeah, all right, that's a good point. I can use that. This, now, this does not fit. We got to get this out of here. But going through it, and it is a tool for just bringing all the information together. That's the way, at least, I sort of see it, and how it could be, interpreted, or how it could be used across industries. But we can't forget that point. And you're right. I mean, some people might just like type in, okay, I'm looking for this data, and just copy paste. Okay, done. There it is. And like, yeah, you're right. And in that case, you are losing critical analysis skills and critical thinking skills.
You are. So. And if we're talking about the future and the future generations who are going to rely on, with all the new advances and things, they definitely need that skill set. And so like, while we do some of the tech stuff and using, models and other stuff in my class, I also just take my students out to just observe, and see out in nature what's going on. Using your senses is still quite important, and common sense. And and teaching them how to vet data, because again, like, there's a lot of stuff out there, that Skeptical Science is one of my favorite web pages, because there's talks about all the different climate myths and what are the rebuttals for all of them, because a lot of these ideas sound like legitimate, and you might be, hey, if you're not educated on that topic, you might agree with. But so that really has done a good job of unpacking, a myth from science as well. So like, showing people, compiling resources of what's actually useful, and vetting is, like I said, so important. And we still need that when it comes to the AI.
100%. And I like that point too of, going out, getting out in nature and just seeing, observing, listening. I think that was one of the words that you used, to open this conversation, is just getting out there and connecting with nature in a way, and taking it all in. And, when you're doing that in conjunction with, working with the data, you're working with others, speaking with others. I think that's where some of the breakthroughs can come. But, that might be a nice point to close things out here. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think listeners will too. I mean, you shared so much as far as stories, as far as insights, and really, really valuable information. I can't thank you enough for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been amazing.
Well, for those interested in learning more about Ulyana and her work, you can do so via some of her activities and endeavors, including Science in the Wild, a company she founded that aims at giving people from all over the world, all walks of life, a chance to immerse themselves in adventure citizen science expeditions. I will have the link for Science in the Wild in the show notes. She can also be found on Instagram, LinkedIn, and again, all of this information will be in the show notes. And I mean, if you liked today's show, please be sure to share, tell a friend. It goes a long way. So you can also show further support by rating, reviewing, and subscribing wherever you access your podcast. And lastly, again, I mentioned this off the top, but head on over to YouTube. I do have a channel over there, trying to gain some traction, some support for it. And I will have a highlight video conversation of this talk there, so you can kind of check that out as well with some imagery. If you do make it over there, do me a big favor, hit that like and subscribe button. It's the only way that platform, YouTube, knows that content matters. So yeah, like and subscribe. It would help a great deal. And finally, don't forget to join us on the next episode of Life as A, where we'll continue to explore and unearth the details of professions and the people behind them. I'm Christopher Schoenwald, your host, and until next time, stay curious about life and living.